The lives of people have a lot of comparison in them. In fact, comparison is the root of all kinds of things. When we feel jealous, it stems from comparison. When we feel angry, it stems from comparison. When we feel superior to others, it stems from comparison. We compare what others have to what we have. We compare our bodies, our morality, our intelligence, and even our worth as a person. This already sounds terrible, but to add to the increasing severity of it, people like to see comparisons as objective. I mean, you look at $20 and compare that to $1, and you know that the $20 is worth more, objectively speaking. But humans are much more complex than that. You cannot place human value on an axis. In fact, all of us are valued the same by our Creator. Comparison between humans has become an unhealthy tool for self-loathing and/or self-loving. One way or another, someone is going to end up with a more negative view of either themselves or the other person. And there's been one tool that has played into this more than any other: social media. Social media has given every single person an ability to look at anyone and compare themselves to them. For some, this ends in suicidal thoughts and depression, and for others, an overinflated ego and superiority complex. Social media, and media as a whole, has become a tool that has allowed for the most dangerous human feeling, comparison, to slither its way into the lives of more people than ever. Social media has its roots in the 90s. In 1997, Bolt and 6 Degrees, the very first social media platforms, were created with the intent of allowing people to connect with others on the different sides of the world. The idea advanced, allowing the creation of new platforms. But the biggest ones we still see to this day, are YouTube, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter. These platforms allow for people to post videos, to connect with their peers, and to share moments with people whom they couldn't before. However, after the rise of such platforms, other things also rose: depression and suicide. We can easily see that the world is on a downward trend mentally. Suicide rates are trending skyward, depression has become commonplace, and around every street corner you can find someone addicted to pornography. In law, women have gained many rights, but in practice they have become treated more like an object, due not only to their own actions, but also the sexual push that the media is trying to force. Many men have lost their masculinity and become confused about their own identity because of the stereotyping inherent in society. Scores on every test have gotten lower as children begin to care even less about schooling and more about their own self-pleasure. In the chase after temporary pleasure, people have abandoned ambition. The economy, the media, the politicians, everything is pushing the idea of getting what you want now rather than working for it. And one of the things that plays a huge role in the numbing of people and the pushing towards pleasure is sexualization, or as I and much of the internet might call it, fan service. Now, when I say words like sexualization and fan service, what I mean is the exaggeration or addition of sexual themes that add nothing to whatever it is being added to, but serves only as a source of temporary pleasure for the viewer. I am not trying to prove that anything sexual is inherently bad. Sometimes sex, when utilized correctly in its media application, can be used to drill home a point or to help tell a story. But when it is exaggerated and does not fit the context it is used for, it is wrong. This also stems to the social media aspect. Showing skin is not wrong, but you should not do it for clicks and views, and it should not be in a sexual manner. In this world, very few things are black and white, and so in this gray area, we must define terms to the best of our ability, and hopefully this cleared that up. It can be easy to brush the issue of sexualization aside as a lesser problem compared to things like abortion and human trafficking, except that both of those things stem from it. Sexualization and fan service cause people to become more numb to things like human trafficking. Pornography is often directly associated with trafficking, and abortion ties in with the idea of temporary pleasure. Abortion as a concept stems from the idea of making life more convenient for the woman who does not want to be a mother. Of course, there are other cases, but for the most part, these issues are either caused or increased by sexualization that people are constantly seeing in the media. The evident pandering of both television and social media to sexual and narcissistic themes meant purely for pleasing an audience, rather than demonstrating interesting and moral principles, has led to modern mental crises and manufactured creativity. Sexualization, pornography, and social media use hurts and degrades the person being exposed to it mentally, physically, and emotionally. Sexualization in media causes people, adolescents especially, to be exposed to content that makes them insecure, promotes objectification, and disregards their humanity. In an article investigating the effects of sexual social media content on young women, Alana Papagiorgio, a research officer with the ARC Life Course Center, notes that the young women she interviewed stated no positive effects from the sexualized images of women, but could list many negatives. She went about attaining this information by displaying different pictures of both their peers and famous actors, as well as sexualized images along with modest ones, asking each girl to identify the positive and negative feelings they associated with each photo. From this study, many of the girls reported body image as a major concern of theirs, and how comparing themselves to others would help them to form a worse view of themselves, which could often lead to depression, eating disorders, objectification by and of oneself, and objectification of and by others. From these interviews, Papagiorgio ascertained that a direct correlation between negative body image and time spent online existed, and that most of these young women could not only see these effects in their peers, but feel them through physical effects like eating disorders and mental stress that comes alongside comparison. These young women found absolutely nothing positive about sexualization and demonstrated the obvious harmful effects present. However, because of the vast overflow of sexual content in media, people have become numb to it, thinking it to be harmless purely because of its sheer volume. How can something so widespread be harmful? Because people keep committing this fallacy, they can easily start to spend more time on the platforms using sexually charged images, believing it causes no harm to themselves. Users on social media often find themselves spending more time on the platform for fear of missing out on conversations or connections with peers. This increase in social media use increases the problem, creating a vicious cycle. Elias Balt, an expert in adolescent mental health and suicide, displays this in his article on the subject, where he investigates the lives of adolescents who committed suicide, attempting to note the part that social media had to play. He found that, of those who use social media often, over half of them were portrayed as socially insecure by respondents and developed a dependency towards social media because they were anxious to be offline and miss out on conversations with peers or online content. Due to the ease with which one can connect with peers on social media, many find themselves developing an addiction to the thrill of connecting with others and a fear of missing out, especially for those who are much more reclusive in real life. Because of their lessened social life, they begin to view media as the sole connection to their peers and become reliant on it for any and all connections, which, in the case of those in Balt's article, resulted in suicide. As terrible that it is, the harm present in social and sexualized media extends far beyond just the viewer. Sexualization in any form of media hurts and degrades the person creating it, mentally, physically, and emotionally. The people behind the screens are feeling the effects of objectification, which involves treating someone like an object, less than human, and as if they do not bear the image of God, which, as God is the purpose to our lives, seems to remove all semblance of true purpose. Often, this leads to depression, and in some cases, suicide. Sexual exposure causes objectification, leading to people viewing themselves or others as little more than a sex toy. People who are degraded to this point become numb, as sex is a gift of God given to us as our most intimate relation. By allowing this commercialization, the creator of the content is having intimacy become a job, leading to further depression. Rosalind Dineen, an author and critic, tackles this subject when she discusses a true crime podcast called The Last Days of August. In the podcast, they discuss the suicide of August Ames, a porn star who hanged herself at age 23. All throughout her life, Ames was treated as an object of disdain for her line of work, until eventually she began to look with that same disdain upon herself, causing her to end it all. Though in her article, Dineen's point is not to highlight the thoughts and actions that led to August's depressing end. Rather, she helps to demonstrate it by way of discussing the reality of August's situation, which displays the amount of stress and pain she had gotten through to make her go through with such a thing. Dineen points out more evidence to why she committed such an heinous and unholy act, which was her objectification. The people creating pornography are being exploited and used in order to fashion such sexually pleasurable and consumable content, whether that be by themselves or an outside authority guiding them. To gain further insight into this topic, I interviewed Tammy Taunton, a key member of the ministry Hadassah's Hope. This ministry's purpose is to evangelize in strip clubs, attempting to help women find Jesus and escape the sex industry. In her many years running this ministry, Taunton has found that the women in the industry are living a life of exploitation, with most of them suffering horrible abuse, sexually, physically, and emotionally. Tammy also provided some sobering statistics. 95% of women in the industry have a history of sexual abuse during childhood. 91% struggle with mental health, and 76% with depression. Now, these statistics go on and on, but I have mentioned the most damning evidence. Women who are involved in the sex industry are constantly being exploited and used and are treated as objects rather than a bearer of God's image. This blatant destruction of purpose is seen in more than just sex workers, though. It also applies to something you will all be more familiar with: creativity. The rise of sexual and pleasurable themes in media is causing a decline in the creativity of the individual and opening it up to becoming a mass-produced individualism, where everyone is identically unique in the pursuit of likes and positive feedback. By going along with the mob, people allow themselves to receive positive feedback on everything they do, because the majority of people will affirm that which they like, and when that which they like is asserted as good, will keep insisting its superiority over all other substitutes of said thing, whether true or not. This mob mentality is cyclical and harms everyone involved, as it removes the uniqueness and creative desire of everyone who participates. This is not the same as exchanging ideas. Exchanging concepts allows people to create something unique by taking inspiration from another person's ideas. Mob mentality causes people to copy an idea rather than just take inspiration. This copy-paste idea of creativity also causes people to stop connecting with others, as they begin to go into art museums only to look at themselves in a mirror there. Social media and pornography take away from human contact, causing people to have their personality and creativity start to match those they see on social media. The antisocial nature of many young people today has to do with how they can receive equal, if not greater, temporary pleasure by being alone and participating in social media or watching sexual content. Due to the constant pressure that life can cause, some begin to retreat to social media as a sort of safe space, feeding into the feeling that real life has less to offer than it. Because of this constant exposure to repeated ideas as they spend more time on media, they become even more ingrained into people's minds. Ramesh Kumar Kesharwani, a professor at a university in Delhi, prompts this idea in the introduction to his study on the subject, where he states that media is beginning to play a pivotal role in the family structure. He describes how media has become a major influencer in the lives of younger people, and that it shapes their personalities as well as becomes a main source for pleasure. In this study, he identifies the increasing role media plays in what kind of person someone becomes. It helps to shape how social one is, how much he enjoys talking to people, even how creative he is. Now, don't get me wrong. Seeing other people's ideas can be very helpful in forming your own. But when there is an overflow of ideas coming into your mind constantly, it becomes harder and harder to create your own unique idea. It also promotes having to think about less about something for yourself, which creates an ease which people enjoy. Thinking critically is easily overshadowed when one can quite easily go along with the popular thing of that time to gain pleasure, resulting in people's creativity becoming a convergence of already socially accepted opinions and concepts. As Alan Jacobs says in his book, How to Think, critical thinking is a lot of work for little reward, especially in this day and age where you can gain a great amount of pleasure by receiving social approval. By going along with the ideas of the majority, we are able to find approval from more people, leading us to becoming more sure of that opinion. Jacobs brings up an amazing point here. Why should we put in more effort than is required? We can receive more pleasure by going along with the majority for agreement, so why should we come to our own conclusions? Social media has helped to create connections that constantly feed them more information in a day than most humans 100 years ago could have had in a lifetime. Why should we ever critically think for ourselves when the thoughts of millions of other people lay right at our fingertips? In most of your guys' pockets, or for the more disinterested of you, in your hands, is a device that holds far more than all the knowledge you could ever need. But with it comes danger. The common beliefs of today constantly push a sexual focus onto us. Television, advertisements, books, So many things push a sexual agenda in order to appeal to the pleasure-seeking nature of man. For all that knowledge on your device, there is an equal amount of vile, disgusting, and sinful content. By refusing to think for yourself and instead going with the group, you help to support sinful and evil ideas. But there are counter-arguments to this, as perhaps you may think the positives of social media outweigh the negatives. Social media has also been shown to have positive effects, as it can improve psychological and subjective well-being. Cheng-Yin Zhang, a professor at Bentley University, supports this with his study, which states that the psychological and subjective well-being of students increased when receiving online support from people on social media, and that it positively affected them. As Zhang displays, social media can boost self-esteem of users and help them to become more confident. However, even though social media can have good effects on self-esteem and mental health, often this is a side of social media that is serving as an echo chamber, making people feel better about themselves due to constant agreement, which will eventually end a reliance on social media to affirm oneself when they can't find that in real life, resulting in a fear of missing out. Jian Mao says in his study on the subject that the fear of missing out is much more common in people that participate actively in social media and less so in others. Through his article, it is evident that social media is more harmful than positive. And although I highly doubt that many of you subscribe to this belief, another common counterargument is that it's not really sexualization, but women's empowerment that we're seeing. Though there are many easy ways to counter this, I think we can easily debunk this theory using scripture. As 1 Timothy 2:9 says, "Likewise also, that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire." Empowerment comes from honoring God with modesty and glorifying Him, not from exposing oneself. Now, we have discussed a lot today, so allow me to remind you of the main points. If you've not been listening to any of this, I hope you will hear this at the very least. Social media and the sexualization our society so commonly pushes on us is harmful. I have described just a few of the many cases of anxiety, of depression, of suicide, all caused by the constant clamor and comparison of pleasure-focused media. Whenever you give into your pleasure-seeking habits by overindulging in social media or by putting sexual things before your eyes, you are actively harming yourself. And if that's not enough to convince you, you are also helping to keep people in positions of slavery and exploitation. And if you happen to be selfish enough to not care about that either, you probably have no creativity left in you from the amount of hours you have spent on Reddit in your parents' basement. But allow me to get back on topic. From all of these points, we see a common theme. Throughout all of this, comparison has proven to be a destructive force slipping into our lives at every point, and we have used it both to degrade others and ourselves. Social media has made it possible for us to constantly compare ourselves to those around us, and not only to those right around us, but those across the world from us. We treat a complex human like an object through our comparison, and lower them from the image of God to an image of man. We try to measure on an axis, like with numbers, when that only leads to more and more damage being done. We begin to compare our bodies, our intelligence, our personalities on only a single axis where one side is seen as good and the other as bad. And through this, we lose our creativity and critical thinking. So don't be the one who encourages this comparison. Fight it. Am I saying that we should avoid social media altogether, or that anything that has possibly harmful ideas should be avoided? No. You should be a light to a very dark world by spreading positivity and God's values in these things. You can glean a lot of good ideas from things you don't agree with. But what can you do to stop the harmful effects so evident from our media? Well, first off, make it so that people want to be active in the real world. By being kind to others and displaying the love of God to others, we are helping to make it so that they are more inclined to connect with others in real life, rather than becoming dependent on media. Remember to show Christ to everyone you meet and to love others so that they can see God and place their worth in Him rather than in comparisons. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Do you think the government should take any action in reducing sexuality on social media platforms?
The question was, do I think the government should take actions to reduce sexual content on social media platforms? I do not think the government should be involved. However, most social media platforms are owned by organizations, and so those organizations can come to their own conclusions about what they want to ban, and parents should be able to tell their children what platforms they can and cannot use due to those things. Does that answer your question? Yes?
Okay, so if you had come across somebody who was like addicted to that sexual stuff on social media, what would you say to get them, try to jumpstart them getting out of that?
So the question was, if I were to meet someone who is addicted to sexual content on social media, how would I go about trying to get them off of that? Well, first off, I would not directly start a conversation and say, you're a terrible person for all of this. That's a bad idea. What you should do instead is, first off, like I said, be kind to them. Show them that real life is pretty great when people are actually going to show you God's love. And if you can get them to realize that God loves them, then it easily becomes more of a, which of these things is greater? The pleasure that God gives you or the pleasure that sexual media gives you? And that question could be very easily answered once they find that out. Yes. Oh. Can you restate the question? I still cannot hear you. I'm sorry. So the question is, would those things...
Comparison and creativity and comparison. Yes. Okay. Can you read the idea that sexualized social media? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I feel like you screamed. So sexualized social media, and you said it inhibits creativity, and then you also talked about how it affects our bodies negatively. So do you think those two together have changed what we consider to be beautiful? Or what people consider, be like the ideal form of beauty?
Okay, so the question is, have the things that have changed our physical views of things and our creativity affected what we seem to see as beautiful? I would say yes, very much so. If you look at the desire in the modern day to look younger, that was not as common a long time ago. The desire to just use surgery to look a lot younger, and some people seem to think that that makes them look more beautiful, even though others may disagree. But yes,